we will come out and try and either work with the developer to get a better project or perhaps oppose the development. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. And we have several major developments in our neighborhood and lots of infill. On October 1st is going to be our AGM. It's going to be a virtual AGM. It's going to be hosted through Zoom with a phone number that people can dial in on. We've decided for safety reasons that's the best way to go. And you never know when we could be back in lockdown again. For more information on the AGM, I encourage you to go to our website, which is www.hamptoniona.ca. If you are signed up on our website, you would get regular mailings, which will provide you with information on several things, including the AGM. If you're not signed up, you can go to the website, you can see what's there, or you can sign up as well while you're there and get notices. If you wish to join our board, and we're always looking for more volunteers, we would welcome you. It would be best, however, if you decide to join the board, if you let us know in advance so someone from our board can meet with you or speak to you over the phone to give you a better understanding of what the board does, what the expectations are of our directors, and to get a better idea of what your interest is in working on the board. If you want to run for an executive position, which is president, vice president, treasurer, or secretary, then it is necessary to put your name in advance. We close the nominations for those positions prior to the AGM, and that way, if there are any contested elections, we know about them, and the people who are running have a chance to prepare whatever they wish to prepare as part of their electioneering. I don't know if anybody has any questions, or if anybody on my board wants to tell me I left something out. There are a few people who are on the board now. So I don't know if Sharon sees any questions, but I'd be happy to answer anything, and then I'll.
No, I don't see anything, but we can always send them your way if they have one afterwards.
Wait 1 second.
No.
I said that. I was just reminded, it's 10 days in advance of the AGM. There will be detail. We have an elections officer, Margaret Hillier, and we will have details on the website how to contact Margaret if you wish to run. It's basically just submitting your name to her and the position you're running for. Okay.
All right.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Lauren. All right, so Lauren gave you a little bit of background on the geography. So that's a really good in for me to start with this. So everybody, I think, who's on this webinar has been to Hampton Park, but for our purposes, we're going to split the woods part, which is the outlined area. Where's my cursor? Here. Between the north and the south. So the top part we're going to call the north. This is the south. This is the Buell Street path that bisects the park and leads out onto Island Park Drive and Maryville Road. Along in here, there's a couple of spots I'm going to be talking about. There's a sort of little meadow area on the grassy lawn. And then there's the path that goes in between the old creek bed, the stormwater culvert, and the sort of ridge escarpment, that sort of sloped area up here. So now that we're all into the geography, we'll go into a little bit of the history as well. So I won't go through every detail here, but just to put yourself sort of in the timeline. Hampton Park is not the oldest park in Ottawa, but it is one of the oldest ones. We'll be turning 100 in 7 very short years. As I get older, the years go by faster and faster. And some of these dates were a little bit more impactful on the park than others, like the 98 ice storm, like in 2015 when hundreds of trees were removed from the Emerald Ash Borer. A little step back into time. The top shot here was the year after the park was designated, and Maryville Road doesn't even exist. Westgate doesn't exist. But by 1965, you can see this is Westgate here, and the park is, still here. A little bit more fill in, it looks like. But it's tough sometimes to see, a lot of people talk about canopy and canopy coverage. You've heard some of that in the news these days, but it only tells you part of the story. Because when you look at the middle picture, this was taken in '99. And at the time, this is a year after the '98 ice storm. And I know the park was really impacted by that. I was reporting on it for the local community association, or the community paper News West at the time. And similarly, 2017 down here, you can't really see that 400, 500 trees were taken out unless you really get down into granular detail. So it only tells a part of the story. In the chat function, I had put a couple of links to two reports that we have access to. So we're building on these for the study that we're doing right now. And these are just a couple of points that I drew out of those reports. You can get into them in more detail yourself. But I found it interesting that the recommendations are kind of the same. There's still a lot of potential for interpretive programs and for local nature study. The reason too that I sort of divided up the woods was because there's a difference in some of the species that you'll find. If you walk into the southern portion, which is actually quite wet most of the time, it's going to be wet today for sure and into the next few days. If you look up, you don't see any large fir trees, no conifers in that section. They only grow on the edges of the woods. Whereas in the northern section, you will find hemlocks and you'll find eastern white pine. You'll even see a little bit of difference in the soil. There's more sand in the sort of ridge and upper woods, the northern woods, than there is in the south. This is a short list of the species that are in there. I know I'm missing some, but many of these you will see. And lucky for us is the city and the NCC have been planting a lot of these species and they still have their tags on them. So if you're interested in really getting into a particular species of tree, go and take a look for those tree ID tags inside the park. But we'll take a look at some of them, starting with probably the one that Hampton Park is best known for, which is the sugar maples. And we've got a lot, and we've got a lot of really large mature ones. We have a lot of ones that we're probably going to lose in the next little while, but we don't want to focus on that today. We've also been planting them. So there's one from the playground area. This is where the city planted a new sugar maple, and that one's still doing okay. That one was remulched, I believe, this spring. The American beech, I have a little bit of worry for because, again, these are some of our largest trees. And from what I know of other places, we're kind of special that we have so many of them. But there is a little bit of a scale, it's called beech scale, that's coming. It is on some of our trees. And if you see this little picture here, this sort of red bubbly fungus that comes up, that's what we're going to start to see. We haven't seen any of that yet. It's not that progressed, but it is something we have to sort of keep our eye out for. And eastern white pines, we don't have very many really left of the big ones. So they have been planting some more. There was at least 4 or 5 planted on the lawn area. One did die. That's probably going to be removed this fall. But here's one of the lovely ones. And I think a lot of people will recognize this one. It's going towards the playground near the Buell Street entrance. And if I can inject my own personal in here, some people have heard me tell this story before, but I was a real variety show nut as a kid, and this little bulb out always reminded me of Diana Ross. So I've always called this tree Diana since I was about 11. You can call her whatever you want. So tamarack is an interesting species because it's a deciduous fir. So its needles turn color and they drop them in the winter, but then they come back green. And then beside here, we have a hemlock, and you'll find those, the biggest ones are along that culvert trail. So by the stormwater ditch. The bur oak I wanted to tease out a little bit because they have planted a few, and these are, some of the trees did not make it very well. But the interesting one that I found was somebody left the price tag on one. So this one tree cost $560. So, well, that seems kind of expensive, but not when you think about what it's going to give you back over the course of its lifetime. So if you're interested in this, the website is there. This is treebenefits.com. These are very average, and it is a US site. Not every species of tree will be there, but it starts to give you an idea of what trees are capable of doing and what some of the benefits, quantifiable benefits, are in terms of stormwater, property values, energy savings, and air quality. So for instance, this bur oak, again, this is an average, but over the course of a year, $71 in stormwater. That's a big deal for us because the models for Ottawa are going to be a lot more precipitation. So we're probably going to have some more local flooding. Just a few more species here that I'll show, and then we're going to get onto the plants. So here we have some lovely new yellow birches that have also been planted. We have some large species, some large specimens as well. Trembling aspen, common hackberry, basswood linden. They have the nice big leaves, so they're an easy one to spot. But you know, trees are sexy and people love them and they're obvious, but they need help, and they need help from the little guys underneath. They play a really important role in the ecosystem. And you know, Hampton Park is lucky. We have quite a good biodiversity still. This is a very short list of plants that we have. There's just no way I could fit everything on one slide. So we'll go through a few of them. Some you can only see at certain times of the year. So we'll start off with one that is one of my favorites, and that's the Jack in the Pulpit. Somebody had been asking, oh, I haven't seen these as often in recent years, but I've actually been finding more and more specimens of it. And at this time of year, what you want to look for is these little seed pods. They're green in this shot, they turn red. And if you find those little red seed pods, you know, you can always just disperse them, you know, where you find that seed pod. Just encourage this plant to keep coming back. Lots of species of fern. Probably the two most common that you'll recognize are the big fiddlehead ferns, which are the lovely, big, broad, feathery ferns. And then we have the sensitive ferns, which have these nice little scalloped edges and they're nice and smooth. I mentioned some that you can only see at certain times of the year. So there's a couple of spring ephemerals. Trout lily is one. So that comes up anywhere, you know, late April into May, and by about mid-June, it's gone. You wouldn't even know it's there. And that can be a problem because people can be walking over the colonies and we could be having some damage done to the colonies and we don't even know it. Similarly for the red trillium, they only come up for a few weeks in the spring, but we have a lot of red ones in particular. For white ones, for nearby, Carlington Hill is a really good one, good place to spot the white ones, but we are awash in the red ones. The meadow area, a lot of common native plants, some, you know, invasive naturalized plants. It's a great place to look for some of those seed eating birds and insect eating birds. And the monarchs, this is the time of year you want to start looking around for monarchs because there is quite a lot of this in our meadow as well, milkweed. That's coming back. So take a look around for that on your next stroll. And if you're into edibles, herbals, or teas, you can find Nature's Coffee and Tea in Hampton Park as well, chicory root, and pineapple weed. Pineapple weed, if you just squeeze the little buds right here and give it a sniff, it actually does smell like pineapple, but it's a wild chamomile, so you can make a tea out of that. But please also do if you're not familiar with what poison ivy or wild parsnip look like, here's a couple of shots. They are in Hampton Park and the city will be spraying for them. I've been in contact with the city and I know that it's on their radar. I'm not a great birder, so my apologies for my bird shots, but again, this is a great place to see a lot of birds. Woodpeckers, especially the pileateds, you can almost walk right up to them. They really don't seem to care if you're around them or not. Really good place to spot some raptors, particularly at certain times of the year or when they're hunting. I believe that's a Cooper's hawk. I'm not 100% sure, but I did see it noshing on something earlier this year. And we normally see mallards making an appearance in the culvert in the ditch. I don't have a watch handy. Can somebody give me a time? I want to just keep an eye on my time.
10:21.
Thank you very much. I'm on schedule. Now, this time of year is the best time for mushrooms. And I'm so happy that it's raining today because tomorrow I'm going to Hampton Park and looking. I'm, again, not a mushroomer. I can't identify everything. But there's been more and more, it seems, coming up in Hampton Park. Maybe I'm just seeing them for the first time. But some of these, like this big one right here, is called Chicken of the Woods. And that is almost impossible to miss. It is in the park. It's been in the park for several years. So take a look for that. It moves around. Here's a few more that you can usually spot at any time of the year, even in the dead of winter. You can usually spot these, which are usually, these are turkey tails. And these are, they're a polypore mushroom called a conch. I think these are old artist conchs, but these you can find all year long. And these little babies, the inky caps, they come up everywhere after a rainstorm, not just in the park. But the fungi are also really important because they can sequester heavy metals. And in an urban park, you never know what might be tossed. I've found some interesting things in the woods in my day. So let's move on a little bit to some of the challenges that Hampton Park faces. And most of them are not new. They're more a question of scale. So let me give you a few population figures for our neighborhood. And these are all based on open data that you can go and find yourself. And the 2 years that the things I want to mention here is between 96 and 2016, over a 20-year period, the entire ward only added about 2,000 people. And then over a 2-year period, we added almost 6. And I don't know what it is for 2020. We also have more people coming to the park from further away to use some of the amenities. So it's not that these activities like riding bicycles and dog walking and all the rest of it haven't always been done in Hampton Park. It is a question of scale. It's the number of people doing it. So these are some of the impacts that we start to see. So wheels in the woods can compact soil, they can widen the trails, they can hamper some of the plant growth. People who go in sometimes with lights can disturb birds during nesting season, just distress the wildlife at any point. You know, soils have been dug to make jumps. I've seen some unsustainable foraging practices popping up, particularly in terms of the fiddleheads, where all of the fiddleheads are cut off instead of just a few. And of course, there's the fort building. Here's a little bit of a history of that one big fort in the southern woods. Those trees were originally bent by the '98 ice storm. And as you can see, in 2020, a portion of it has now collapsed. So it took a while. And one of the reasons that we ask people not to move this stuff around is we don't know what you might be moving. You might be moving something that's harmful. You might be moving something that, you know, is necessary for where it needs to be. And you may be moving it into an area and then opening up an area that can be then trampled over. So more trail widening. This is pretty common, kind of disrespectful, and it can be really harmful because it can weaken a tree ultimately, especially when it comes to the beech trees. They don't need any more. They like to get, they're the popular ones to be carved in as well. Invasive species we can do a little bit about. The emerald ash borer, as I mentioned, took out pretty much all of our ash trees. There are some new ones coming up, but they may only be safe until they reach a certain age. The dog strangling vine, I will give a huge shout out to 2 people on this webinar, Eileen and Wendy Burnham, who have been fantastic about keeping that under wraps and pointing it out. And the Japanese knotweed, which is the shot right here in the middle, I think a lot of you know about that. We've had some success cutting that back, and I'm very happy to say that we have, the NCC has also got this in its sights. And so a removal project is hopefully coming in the fall. So we may have some details to report a little bit later on that. So forests aren't just nice things for us to have and, you know, places for us to take a nice walk. They are actually really, really valuable. And all of these points are proven. You can find these resources online. I'm happy to send any resources to people who want more information. But so it's not just a nice stroll in the woods. We have so many different benefits from a forest. And so we have a real responsibility to keep them healthy. There's also, just like in a forest, strength in numbers. So I believe the more people involved, the more people who know what's going on, the better off we're going to be. So please get in touch with us. If you're not already a member of Friends of Hampton Park on our mailing list, that's the way you can get in touch with us. My apologies, Lauren, I forgot to update your website address, but I did put it in the chat. And I talked about some of the current projects. So we are working on some self-guided maps and self-guided tours, as well as some stewardship and ID signs, and as well the ecological study. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to our ecologist, Holly Bickerton. And Holly's based in Ottawa. She's got more than 15 years experience in field ecology and applied conservation research. She holds degrees from McMaster University, a Bachelor of Education from Queen's, and a Master of Environmental Sciences, my apologies, from York University. So Holly, I will turn things over to you with your very first slide.
Thanks, Sharon. It's nice to be asked to speak here. I've had a couple of visits already to Hampton Park. So just as a bit of background, I'm taking a similar approach in both Hampton Park and Carlington Woods. The friends of both groups have asked me to look at the existing conditions in the parks. And fortunately, we have two good studies to go on in the past and look at some of the changes, I guess, over time, if to the extent that that's possible, and highlight the main threats and impacts and make some suggestions as to what to do about the things that are challenges in the park. I guess kind of prioritize things a little bit. I know that it's difficult when you walk through a site to, you see everything and it's hard to decide where to start. So that's sort of where I'm coming to this from. And I just want to back up a little bit with one of the, probably the biggest study that we have for urban natural areas in Ottawa. It was done in 2003. One of the top field botanists in Ottawa, Dan Brunton, the top field botanist in Ottawa, compared hundreds of sites across the city in a single year by a bunch of criteria. So, he walked around, took a species list, identified some of the threats, and ranked sites on a number of criteria, high, medium, or low. And Hampton Park Woods was identified as high in terms of ecological value. And I guess that probably doesn't come as any surprise to people. It's pretty beautiful, mature woods. But the high scores, I'll just go through for you. The high scores, the value of it ecologically, I guess, was that it does have, for such a small area, it does have 4 different plant communities, and it also has that culvert that runs through it, a creek line, I guess, if you want to call it that. So that just provides kind of some structural diversity with the big sand hill and then the low-lying area to the south near the dog park. At the time, Dan found 111 native plant species, and I've found some more, but there are some of his that I have not found. And a number of them are kind of specific. So when I say the high coefficient of conservation, that's just a tool that ecologists use to determine how specific something needs to grow, I guess, and how sensitive to disturbance it is. So say, for example, an orchid that only grows in one place would be a very high coefficient of conservation. A weed that grows anywhere would be very low. So it's a kind of special place. I think that's what that's indicating. And at the time, he found two significant, regionally significant species. Sharon and I looked pretty hard for one of them a couple weeks ago, and we came up empty. I'll try again, but my concern is that the habitat that Dan described to me and the location that he found it is now pretty disturbed. It's pretty eroded by bikes whipping down the sandhills. I'm not especially hopeful for that. But anyway, we'll keep trying. Next slide, please. And I'll just explain some of the challenges that Dan observed even at the time. So a couple you can't really do a whole lot about. As you know, the natural area has been cut off by roads and neighborhoods, despite the community's efforts to do that. It's not as cut off as it could have been. So it doesn't have a lot of connection to other natural areas. But having said that, there's more and more research now that is coming out that shows the importance of these islands. Like, you know, if you degrade that area, then really there is nothing. So even though it's not directly connected, it's still a stopover for migratory birds. It still provides a lot of value. It's not big enough for interior habitat for breeding birds. So these are specific birds that need big areas. It's a little too small for that. And another low score, which won't surprise you, is that even at the time, 2003, there were 20 different invasive plant species that were significant and giving a significant impact. And also at the time, some dumping of garden waste on the edges. I haven't witnessed that in the same way. So hopefully that's been minimized, I guess, a bit. Informal trails and just general edge effects. So that was the 2003 study. Next slide, please. One of the things that I wanted to do was give an indication of what the formal trail network is and what the actual trail network is in both areas, Carlington and Hampton Parks. There's just been a proliferation of these small trails. So on the left, you can see this is the formal trail network, the official trails that are maintained and so forth. You'll know them all. And then on the right is a trail map that I made by walking trails with a GPS app and mapping them all. And you can really see how many small trails there are collectively. I realize that most people who walk through the park know this inherently, that in some areas you just look and all you see is trail. You don't even see understory. And that is pretty much the area within the red circle that I've identified. It's almost no understory left in that area. So it's been significantly impacted. And I think this may be the reason that we can't find the one significant plant that was one of the significant plants that was observed in 2003. So yeah, I think the visual is helpful because I think we can all agree that there really are too many trails. It's being kind of loved to death. So next slide, please.
Telling you.
There we go. And this is what it looks like on the ground. So this is how we see it. The top picture there just shows the complete absence of the understory. The thing that I'm more and more concerned about, though, as I read a bit more, is the soil compaction. So wheels in particular.
I think, Holly? I think we may have lost Holly for a second. Hang on. Come on. Excuse me, everyone. Okay. Yeah, I think we lost Holly. She's going to have to sort of join back on. She'll try and log back in. So while we wait, There was one question that I had. Okay, so while we wait for Holly, everybody else can hear okay? Everybody else is good? All right. Okay. Oh, my apologies. All right, there was a question about whether or not we are allowed to pick any of these plants. Technically, you're not supposed to be picking on public lands, but I am a trained forager, and there's some things that if they're invasive, I don't have much of an issue with, and I don't think the city would. Some plants are a little bit more dicey, and you shouldn't really be picking them at all, or you should be really know what you're doing before you go out and pick, so that you know how much of one particular plant to pick. Trout lily, for example, is edible, but you don't want to pick too much of it. So, you know, it really depends on the plant. So I'm not sure what happened to Holly. Haven't gotten her back yet. All right, look, I'm going to open this up to questions. If anybody has any questions, and we'll wait on Holly. So I can unmute people, or you can, I believe you can unmute yourselves. If you wanted to try that, or you can always type a question into the chat. All right. So how's everybody doing?
Good.
I was reminded while you were talking about the raptors in the park,
Yes.
that there were merlins in the park. And when we were fighting the off-ramp into the park, there was a number of arguments being used. But the presence of the merlins and not disturbing their habitat was one of them.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I remember. Well, we stopped the ring road twice, if I'm not mistaken, over the course of my lifetime. They've tried to do that twice in that same area. So yeah. Anyway, I think we have Holly back.
I'm back. I'm very sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
No worries. This is what happens on a rainy day or any day.
Yeah, something happened. Anyway, here we are. I'm trying to talk fast in case it happens again. So, right. So this isn't any surprise to anybody. The pictures on the ground. I just wanted to put in the lower right there. There's a picture of the sand escarpment. And Sharon and I walked along the top of that escarpment. As you know, there's, maybe remember, there's the formal path at the bottom, but there's also a trail along the top. And there are 6 different places where bike chutes have kind of been created right along there. So that's too many. And so these are the kinds of things that are going to need to be looked at and really reconsidered, I think. The challenge with soil compaction, as I started to say, I've recently read that you wouldn't expect this, but that it can take up to 2 human generations to reverse that. So really, it's a question of trying to get organic matter back into the soil to create those air pockets and so on. What's really been being created is kind of cement. And I think on the next slide, there's some photos of the kinds of things that you can watch for as far as the effects. Yeah. So on the left there, you can see throughout Hampton Park, but especially in that mature woods where the soils are deep but loose and being compacted, there's a fair amount of branch drop and death of lower limbs of trees. So this, obviously this weakens the tree, but it's one of the earlier signs that trees are struggling. And then ultimately, susceptibility to things like heat stress, which we've increasingly had in our summers, and wind throw and ice storms and so on. These things do add up. And when you don't have the natural regeneration underneath, because those small seedlings can't get any purchase in the soil, then you really start to change the function of that area. So I think this is the early stage of that, and I think with a corrective action that can change, but I wouldn't want it to go really any further. So, and on the lower right there, you can see a challenge as far as just management of trails. So here's one where a tree has fallen and not been removed. And the problem with that is that if it's a well-used trail, the behavior of people does not change. So people will find a way around to get to the other part of the trail. And that's what's happening. And in some cases, that's what's proliferating trails around. I mean, I know it's tempting to think, okay, well, if we just leave this trail, if we just leave this tree down, people won't go there anymore. But there are better ways to identify a trail network and keep people on the trail, because I do think that most people want to stay on the trail. Cyclists, that's a bit different. We can talk about that shortly, I think. So next slide. So as I said, I do have still one more visit, and I suppose, you know, there are always things that you learn. Right now, I would say here's kind of some of the highlights of where I'm thinking of going. I think that a significantly reduced trail network needs to be considered. That would include not just the existing formal trails, but recognize the fact that there are these informal trails that people use frequently. Maybe there's a bit more trail network that is needed in such a busy park than just what's identified as the formal trails, but then take that whole network and identify it correctly and surface it properly and provide some maps and maybe some in-park directional signage to keep people on the trail. And I know this doesn't address the issue of the people who really want to go off the trail and create their own trails. I think that's a separate thing I've put under the third dot point. My suggestion from an ecological point of view would be to limit the bike use to the existing formal trails, or at least the newer trail network. Many city parks are clear that they can't sustain off-trail use by bikes. There's a new bike pump track at Carlington Park. It's not too far away. But I realize that, you know, the park users of this park, it's not really a destination park, it seems. It's more local kids in the neighborhood, so that there would have to be some outreach around that. I would say just reducing, just to backtrack a bit, those informal trails, that spaghetti map as.
Oh. Did we lose you again? Oh dear.
Remove a bunch of those bike chutes down the escarpment and focus on that area just to the north of Buell Street, where the upland forest has been so inviting, I think, for new trail creation. The fourth point on fourth, I love forts. I have 2 kids. It's a great thing for kids to be able to do, and I understand there's been kind of a proliferation this year because kids don't have a lot else to do. I just think it would be a potential idea to try to have a designated fort area, perhaps. It's a bit like a nature playground that directs kids to it. I know that takes the fun out of fort building for a lot of kids, but I think the message that we have to get out is that we can't love it so much. We have to move, you know, if you want to build a fort of your own making, then, you know, Hampton Park is maybe not the place to do it. So my suggestion would be kind of on that formal path from Buell Street to Island Park. There are plenty of places that are already somewhat disturbed. Wouldn't have to be there, but that could be a discussion for maybe the community to have as to where the best place would be for that. I think next slide, please.
Oops.
Yeah, and as far as the regeneration and the restoration, if you are able to close a bunch of trails, then, you know, it would be a perfect time to try a little pilot project as far as regenerating some of that forest understory. I would suggest at this point that restoration where you kickstart it with some plantings is probably going to be the most effective. And just to start getting some organic matter into the soil and spreading seeds. But the first step is really to get the foot traffic and the bike traffic securely off of it. So continue and increase invasive species removal. I'm surprised here actually of the dog strangling vine. It didn't jump out at me as a problem at all. So done to whoever's been controlling it. I've spent most of my time in the forest, mind you. But the Japanese knotweed is certainly an emerging problem, and I was quite proud of myself when I found a little patch and sent the photo to Sharon and said, "Oh, you really should get on top of this little patch," and she's already on top of it. So, Norway maple and other invasive trees. I found that Japanese tree lilac seems to be proliferating within the park. There's some honey locust. Those are, in some ways, those are kind of easy gains because they're not as difficult to get rid of as, say, a Japanese knotweed or a dog strangling vine. You can cut them down and they're pretty much gone. So, and they make a big difference in terms of the structure. So that's why I would suggest, perhaps through discussions with NCC or the city, that those ones might, in certain areas, be easier gains. And then the garden waste dumping, I haven't really, that hasn't jumped out at me as a problem anymore, but certainly that's something to keep an eye on and monitor, especially along that western boundary where so many properties back onto Hampton Park. And then, you know, I've in the city of Ottawa, I always seem to be saying this, but this is a property that's owned by NCC, managed by the city of Ottawa. The Friends of Hampton Park, I didn't realize was so new, but has already really stepped in. So it's these kinds of points in time are really good places to clarify management responsibilities, whose responsibility is where. Sometimes the temptation is, if it's managed by everyone, then it's managed by no one. And that's what we want to avoid, is that jurisdictional question of, well, it's not my responsibility. So if those things are clearly laid out, that leads to a much better outcome. So those are my initial thoughts. So I'm quite interested to hear from people on the call and other things that you think, gaps in this or other ideas that you have would be helpful.
Thank you, Holly. Yeah, one question on this exactly. We just got one in from Sinead and Colette. Some ideas on how we can, either stop those sort of bike trails, saying that, educational signage would be helpful. We are trying to do a little bit about that.
Yeah.
I'm using the phrase, no wheels in the woods, please. And sometimes it opens up a conversation that you can have with kids, with their parents. Most people, they want the best for this place. They do. They love this place. I've never heard anybody say anything but good things about Hampton Park. So it's just a question of knowing the impact that you have, and we all have an impact, right, in some way. Holly, do you have any other ideas on, some practical things that we could do? Like other than
I think if you are able to reduce that trail network, then, for example, taking a pilot project and putting temporary fencing up around that area, saying regeneration area in progress, restoration area in progress, it's to send that message. It's to send that small message that this area for now has got to be off limits because we've trampled it too much. So by starting small and starting that conversation, I think that might be the best way to do it. I know it's really tough. There's no such thing as enforcement by law world. I've seen many other parks that, you can't really stop that kind of. So I think your approach is exactly the right one, just, you know, kind of polite discussion about what we love about this park and the fact that we want to keep coming into this area with big mature trees.
Mhm.
But the big mature trees are alive and we need to keep them that way. You know, we need to keep them healthy, and they need to, you know, they need to make more trees for us as well, for your kids to come into this park. So I think you're doing exactly the right thing. Again, some signage. Signage is kind of a double-edged sword, right? People don't like to see a lot of signage, but that just that gentle working with people and starting small, and I don't know, maybe having an article in the community newspaper, for example, if there are community, I know I've seen a couple of camps and so on using the park, which, you know, as a parent, I think is fantastic. But starting with those day camp groups, for example, around the fort issue.
Mhm.
And saying, you know, guys, I know you guys love to build forts. We want to pick a spot that is going to be the fort spot and perhaps involve them in that discussion. I'm just off the top of my head here.
Mhm.
But you know, that might help as well, because the after school programs and the summer camp programs that use the park can be your ally as far as sending that message out, so that when kids are using it on their own time, they say, hey guys, let's go to the fort park.
Yeah.
For example.
Exactly. And Lauren made a good point that, you know, like I've been wanting to get in touch with some of the local schools about, you know, potential outdoor education, particularly during the pandemic.
Yeah.
But I haven't wanted to really, schools and teachers and parents are under a lot of stress right now. They don't need me coming in, but it's on our radar sort of thing. And we do have a lot of parents, parent volunteers with the young kids, which I think we're going to be able to do that in the future. And yes, and with the Dovercourt Recreation Center as well. Because something else, I'm hoping to maybe get a Westboro Brainery connection as well. They do the classes, so people can, you know, go through Dovercourt. Some of the self-guided maps that we're working on, they'll be, you know, both electronic and print, so we'll be able to give them to schools and community centers once we get them. So those kinds of things. Wendy also had a question about the grow it, don't mow it. I've been noticing the city's been mowing an awful lot this year. I don't know if anybody else has noticed. Hampton Park has been mowed like, I don't know how many times. Every time I go there, it seems that, you know, there's mowing. But yeah, so the city NCC, the responsibility is a difficult one to balance. Because the city is responsible for maintenance, but they're not responsible for tree planting on the NCC side. So I don't know why you should be maintaining everything if, you know, but anyway, but we'll figure it all out.
Yeah, the lawn space at the northeast there is definitely an opportunity for growing it rather than mowing it.
Mm.
I can say that my experience is almost that I've seen a bit less mowing. And in the case of NCC, I don't know if Camille is on the call, but I feel like I've seen a lot less mowing on NCC properties, which I think is fantastic. And I don't know if the reason is because of COVID or because of, you know, more of a deliberate approach, but the result is good. And so that's us also an opportunity to think about that meadow space and how it's used and if it's used as a meadow.
Yeah.
You know, is it used for soccer or is it used for big open events?
Yeah.
And that's definitely an opportunity to mow less, like once a year, say, for example. And that seems to be the approach that NCC has started to take along the Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway. It's been a lot less mowing this year. So
yeah, okay.
On the bike path there.
There was another question about creeping thyme for erosion control, but it requires light. So the places we really need erosion control are more in shade, I believe. There's some areas, but maybe you can speak to that, Holly? Creeping thyme?
Yeah, erosion control is shade is tricky. I don't know a lot about it. I promise though, I will try to find out some suggestions. There's a couple of plants that seem to do super well in the park. One of them is false Solomon seal.
Mhm.
Of it, it seems to really love it there. So I think those kinds of things would be my cues, is to say, well, what's really successful here and what might take very well.
Mhm.
That would be one that jumps out at me, because it is kind of colony forming, and it could really help. A couple of the ferns are clonal, so they might really help establish a bit more like binding of the soil. But I want to look into that for that sandridge, because a shrub that is really, it's a lovely understory shrub, is alternate leaf dogwood. Some people call it pagoda dogwood. It's actually used in landscaping as well, but it's a native forest understory tree, and like a small tree. And so that would be a nice one to, again, like provide that middle layer of structure that has been really depleted along there, and it helped to give the conditions for the other understory plants.
Okay.
But the good news about the sand escarpment, though, is like it's not compacted, because it's all been chewed up. So you have either this one issue or you have the other issue, but that's one area where if you get foot traffic off it, I'm hopeful that you could get some good regeneration there.
Yeah. It's on the city's radar, because that was a part of that ridge which was really badly dug out, and I've seen water coursing through it and then down below. I did report that to the city, and they said, oh yes, that should be filled in, but it hasn't been, and that was about 2 months ago. So, but you know, it's recorded somewhere with the city. That's what I always tell people. If you see concerns like this, even if you don't get a really good response from 311 from the city, it's important to get these things on the record, because we can start looking at trends. If people are seeing this and they are reporting things of the nature in a park, we can start parsing some of that information, and maybe using it, you know, to suggest, well, maybe you need.
It's not uncommon in Eastern Ontario, but for some reason it's not it's more of a northern species. So it and I think that's probably why it was found on that escarpment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My apologies.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot to clarify, there was a photo on the slide of a nondescript looking plant, and that is actually the one.
Oh, right at the beginning.
Yes.
With the yellow flower.
With the yellow flower, yeah, that's an agrimony, it's called. So it's called grooved agrimony. There are 2 species that we have in Ottawa. One's super common, and this one's really, for weird, I don't know why it's so uncommon, because where it grows, it almost grows like a weed. It's actually almost thickety and weedy. So it's actually on the margins. If you want to look for it, it's on the margins on the south end of the park near the dog park. It's really not much to look at, and it's most helpful when it's in that super bright yellow flower that you see there, which was about a month ago. Yeah, so that's grooved agrimony, and there are quite a few patches on the south margin of the park. And we also found some on one of the trails that's the formal trail that runs north-south through the park, just north of where Buell Street comes in. There's a big patch of it there as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are some pretty interesting plants in the park, and I keep finding a few more little surprises, which is nice. So for an area that is so heavily used, I think it's really impressive that for the most part, there's a great consistency between the 2003 report and the 2020 report. I just want to, looking forward to the next 20 years and the levels of trampling that I see, I just want to keep it without any further losses, if that makes sense. That's what I would aim for.
Well, unless anybody's got any more questions, I think we're coming up, or we're just a little bit past 11. Let me just...
I have one question. Other than staying off the spaghetti spaghetti trail network, what can we as individuals do to help?
Yeah, Sharon and I were having this discussion a little bit in the field because there's so assisted seed distribution is one idea that I have. You want to have somebody who's reasonably good on their plant ID, so you're not spreading weeds into this area, but there are some native plants that really thrive in that area. For them to get their seeds in to try to help regenerate the area could kind of kickstart it. So that's one thing, apart from just, as you say, staying off of it, helping to kickstart that natural regeneration would be a great thing. Also, definitely the kind of work that you do right now of monitoring for new patches of invasive species, because unfortunately, these invasive species are the most aggressive and they're successful, so they are often the ones that can colonize these difficult situations, compacted soils or droughty soils. So they're more likely to get in there first. So to stay on top of any small establishment of invasive species, to leave that room for the native species would be pretty important as well. I would say those are the couple of main things that you could do. Really, it's a question, or just, as I said, the native plantings to try to kickstart more of a natural regeneration.
Another question. You showed pictures of the tree that is down with respect to managing the trails.
Yeah.
What if some of those if some of those trees were like turned 90 degrees and blocked the bike chutes? Would that help? So leaving the ridge, remove it from the top ridge trail and move it parallel to the trail so that it's actually blocking bikes from going down, but then they might just push it down.
That is always the risk, right? I'm almost like, I hate fencing in such a beautiful area, but it's just some kind of temporary snow fencing or something to send that message. Because my concern with that is, you're right, that you move that tree and point it downhill to cover that bike chute, and the bike chute's just going to migrate to one side or the other.
That's true, yeah.
Right? That it's really the behavior that is, yeah.
I mean, even if you leave one bike chute open, one or two, so that you leave some of that behavior, but you remove, 4 others. I don't know.
Another idea that I had for Carlington Woods, because there's some heavy bike damage over there too. I'm going to actually talk to a friend of mine who's a mountain biker. I think that a heavy application of cedar mulch might be kind of effective at stopping bikes. If you're a cyclist, you might, and you tried to bike in cedar mulch, it's not that easy.
Wipe out.
Yeah. So that might be one way to physically stop it. So, because there's not going to be any magic bullet, right? You've got education, signage, maybe some fencing, articles in community newspapers. Because I think in some cases I've seen parents and kids out there, and you really kind of have to get to the parents as well as the kids and have them realize that this isn't what we can sustain in this park. And maybe there's room for discussion. My perspective is ecological too, so I'm here to say what the park needs. But if in consultation with the community, there's a strong bike group that says we want this one trail, well, that's a community decision. So
Molly,
that, you know, that could be discussed as well.
Molly,
Yeah.
I'd like to, sorry to interrupt you. I'm with the Friends of Carlington Hill. I live 1 block from all the action.
Yep.
So I can see the headlamps at night. I can see the illumination of the lamps that light up the whole EPZ. It's mostly the nighttime activity that's really disturbing. They go in there with shovels. They're doing it at night. These lamps are unbelievable. I can see it from my house. It illuminates the whole area. This is, I am almost 100% positive why there is so many lack of birds. I've lived here 30 years. I found 1 monarch yesterday. The hill used to be covered in them. It's the nighttime activity by the mountain bike community around here is unbelievable.
Wow.
Even calling 311, by the time they get there, they've gone. The fire's unreal. It's the nighttime activity. They're too afraid to do it during the day because people are going to say something.
And they know it's wrong.
So, you know, it's so disheartening.
Yeah, and unfortunately, like the one thing that Hampton Park has in its favor is it is visible.
That's right.
Yeah. You know, Island Park,
Yeah.
right alongside of it, we have houses that back right onto it. The Carlington Woods, they're on their own. Nobody's looking at those all the time, right? We don't have
That's
ours.
right. There's no police presence. There's no 311.
Yes.
It's a free for all.
Yeah. Carlington is a whole different
Yeah, that's
game. Sharon says it's not a neighborhood park in the same way. It's more of a
Conservation area.
there's so many access points that are not residential from those industrial areas and so on. There's no eyes on it. So I have a question for you though. Is that night activity in the woods next to the bike pump park, or is it on the hill, or where's
It's throughout the NCC because they've got all the trails going there. It's racing. They have
Racing.
like little forts built where you have a timekeeper, and the trails have been marked with different colors. We can tell when there's going to be a race because the little markers appear on the trees. I watch the lights, and it is attached, the EPZ is attached to the pump track. So the pump track is pretty well the starting point. I can see it from my window. I'm in a big duplex, and it's driving me out of my mind. Just how many there are now. If you look on that Trail Forks, the mountain biking trail network thing, so many unsanctioned trails for City of Ottawa, and they do nothing about it. You alert them to it, they do nothing about it.
Wendy? I wouldn't mind giving you a call because I've got at least one more visit to Carlington Hill, so that would be I'd be interested in where you're seeing the activity.
Sure.
I can put
Yeah.
you.
Recently, they've been
Right.
taking out the rocks on the top portion of the EPZ near the pump track.
Yeah, I've seen that.
You go down the hill.
Yeah.
And it's extremely dangerous with them rolling these big boulders down there. So much that we've tried to move them ourselves to block the downs part, which would be so easy, but the councillor he's turning his head to all this. Someone is going to get hurt eventually.
Yeah. And the challenge with Carlington Hill, it seems like it's more organized through the Mountain Bike Association,
Oh, yes.
AMBA, right? Which is a very formidable opponent. Like they're very well organized, and their whole rationale is to get more trails through natural areas, and they've been pretty successful at it. So at least Hampton Park is not, it doesn't really have the terrain, the topography, I think, at this point to be attractive to AMBA.
Well, they're mostly winter activity there.
That's true. I mean, the only time I've really seen, you know, a lot of adult cyclists doing much, it's in the winter. But it is 10 after 11. I promised people an hour long, and I know you've got probably a busy Saturday, everybody, ahead. I don't know if there's any other questions. I didn't see any. I know Lauren has had to take off. So
Sharon has, I'll just say Sharon has my contact details. So if people have other questions that they haven't thought of yet, or information, you know, like Wendy said, might be useful, feel free to pass it on through Sharon.
Well, I'm in there every day. I can show you every cut tree, every new tree.
Yeah.
If you ever want, you know, someone to float along with you, I can help you.
thanks, Wendy.
And thank you very much for the presentation. It was
Oh,
awesome.
my pleasure. And because of some of the video weirdnesses, what I'm going to double check the recording. We've probably lost a portion of the recording. If that's the case, I may just put the presentation up for you guys to take a look at if you wanted to, and some of the questions and answers. So look for a link from me. Something will be coming afterwards so that you've got some resources to go on afterwards. And again, if you've got any questions that you come up with afterwards, send them to us and we'll do our best to answer them. So thank everybody for our first one, and we hope this is the first of many that we're going to have, and hopefully we can get better bandwidth.
Thank you so much. This has been just absolutely wonderful, well organized. Few technical glitches, but the information is just so helpful. And thank you so much for doing this.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, until I can get down to the CBC studios and get their space.
Next week.
Exactly. That's for next week.
Big aspirations.
Thank you very much, Holly. and
Thank
Sharon.
you.
That was
Nice to
great.
meet you all.
Okay. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a great
Bye.
weekend.